Hey everybody, welcome to the NFL Playoff Recap on TYT Sports, brought to you by the Vizio P-Series 4K Ultra HD Smart TVs. That's one right there. Ben Mankiewicz, Drew Carter, and joining us from St. Louis, Missouri, Taylor Jones. Both Drew and Taylor are serious NFL analysts. Taylor, you've seen on the NFL Network. Drew is a graduate, played Big Ten football at Minnesota, University of Minnesota, Golden Gopher. And great bowl win for you. Oh, I did I get that wrong again?
Every time, man.
A graduate of the Ohio State University. The Steelers and the Ravens, and really such an impressive performance, I thought, from the Ravens in their 30-17 win over the Steelers, that right away you think that team with that kind of performance unquestionably could, not saying they will, but they can beat the Patriots next week in Foxborough, don't you think, Drew?
I think especially they got healthy at the right time.
Yep.
You know, everybody's coming back, and Steve looked great today, Smith, and Harbaugh always figures out a way to pull it out. And the way they played tonight, I feel like they can go to Foxborough next week and get it after Tom Brady.
Taylor, that was my first reaction, that just makes that game winnable, at least for Baltimore. What was your quick first takeaway on the Ravens today?
Well, this, to me, had a feel of a heavyweight boxing match where in the first half, these teams were just kind of feeling each other out like you would expect from teams that have already played each other twice in the regular season and are obviously perennial rivals. But I think, as Drew mentioned, Harbaugh got the better of Tomlin in the fact that he made better halftime adjustments, particularly on offense, getting back to his explosive style of offensive play, and I think that ended up being the difference in the game.
You know, this NFL season, the last couple of NFL seasons, teaches you in an interesting way, I've thought, who the most valuable players in the league are by virtue of how a team plays when those guys aren't around. Yeah. And you look at the Lions on days when they don't have Calvin Johnson, and they're incompetent. They look like a team that can't move the ball downfield at all, and I think, well, Calvin Johnson's the MVP of this league. And then this year you saw one of the worst performances I've ever seen a good team make in an NFL game, the Colts against the Cowboys, without T.Y. Hilton. You think, well, I guess T.Y. Hilton, pretty important. But this was an indication that Le'Veon Bell was a really critical player, because it really changed the way this game felt, and it totally changed the focus that the Ravens. You heard Collinsworth all game talking about how well those Ravens defensive backs were playing, and they were playing that way because certainly the safeties, they weren't scared. They weren't scared.
I really was looking forward for Le'Veon to play because, but his knee injury, I mean, the hyperextension looked pretty bad, and I just really wanted him to play because the fact that he's the most dynamic player on the team besides Brown, but he would have changed the game totally, and definitely with the safeties, they weren't worried about the running backs at all. So I
want to quote Collinsworth again, basically, or paraphrase him, because he's right. It's not so much that the Ravens have been pretty stout against the run all year, but it's in the passing game that Bell is so valuable, and the potential of taking a short little dump and turning it into a 30, 40-yard play or a touchdown.
It's huge.
That changes how the safeties react.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. They definitely have to think about way more stuff when they know if he has the ball within 5 yards of a little dump down, everybody's reacting to the ball. So it's kind of like they're not thinking about the receiver, so that opens up more pass plays for Steve Smith and Troy Smith, and it's just a whole different dynamic when. I mean, I'm sorry, opposite way. I'm talking about the other receivers. Yeah. But they open up for the receivers, and then.
You mean for Wheaton and obviously for Antonio Brown and because that receiving, Roethlisberger's numbers were gaudy.
They were gaudy.
But it felt like the Ravens secondary controlled that game. Is that a fair thing, you think, Taylor?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Le'Veon Bell, who accounted for 33% of this team's scrimmage yards throughout the regular season. To have that loss of productivity, that's going to be a major impact in the game. The two kind of fill-in running backs, Dree Archer and Ben Tate, who was just signed off the street this week, accounted for just 98 yards combined today for about 25% of the team's offense. And we saw basically the biggest play in the game was the Terrell Suggs interception, in which Ben Tate deflected the ball up in the air. He had two major errors, one being he tipped the ball up in the air, allowing the defense to corral it. But the first and probably the most important one on the play is he missed his blitz pickup on that play, which allowed the pressure to get to big men. So the loss of Bell was impactful in major facets of the game, not just his ability to run the ball.
And every fan of every team that's got some young running back that they think is ready to plant the aging veteran, that's why they haven't done it. That's why no matter Frank Gore's still pretty productive, but that's why nobody picks up a blitz like Frank Gore.
Right.
And so when I know Falcon fans were like, why isn't a guy like Devontae Freeman? Why isn't he playing? It's because I guarantee you, that's why. That's why. And
we're coming up in the time of the year at the NFL draft and the scouting combine where we've talked about this devaluing of the running back position.
Right.
But games like today really prove why, even though you may be able to find one in the later rounds or even as an undrafted free agent, they're still very important to the outcome.
Yeah, and just because you can find one later doesn't mean the one you have is good enough.
That's right.
Like it's a steal, but I don't know how.
And I guess Josh Harris, the other back today, who got some time for the Steelers, but you can just tell the Ravens were not in any way afraid of these guys the way they're afraid of Le'Veon Bell. You mentioned the Terrell Suggs interception, Taylor. It was certainly the catch of the day coming from a linebacker. That was impressive. That was impressive because it was not luck. Like, it was under control. He's like, oh, the ball's in my legs. I'll be squeezing the legs together.
Right when he intercepted the ball, I just was like, I can't wait to hear what he has to say because he's going to have something to talk about. And I'm just like, every time Suggs does something, it's just going to be full-on press release. It's going to be quotes for days. They're in ESPN.com tomorrow. So it's like, I'm like, oh, great. But it was a great play, so I can't be mad.
There were a lot of things that stuck out in this game. A game the Ravens really controlled. I made a foolish in-game bet on the Steelers, but I think that might have been my heart, not my head. But the Ravens, then at the end of the game, when the outcome, granted, has largely been decided, we saw when Roethlisberger gets knocked out, Gronkowski comes in, then Roethlisberger comes back in.
Which I don't think was smart.
Looked like a guy who'd had a concussion. I mean, lying on the ground, clearly in pain, pinching the bridge of his nose. Then he comes in, throws a terrible interception. Granted, you're down a couple of scores, 30-15 at that point. And it looked like a play where a quarterback goes, "Where's 84? I don't care how covered he is. I'm gonna throw it to my guy."
Yeah.
But nonetheless, post head injury of some sort. I'm not a doctor. We don't know if he was concussed, but he was. And he throws the pick, and then Heath Miller on the next drive looked like he had a concussion, and he fumbled. And that's 2 turnovers from guys who probably shouldn't have been in the game. And it's
probably don't know their last name at the time.
It's a little bit of a sign that as much progress as the NFL made, and the NFL made this progress under tremendous pressure and only under tremendous pressure, that here we are in a playoff game. We're like, yeah, we got this protocol unless you're down 2 scores in the 4th quarter.
And we need you, Ben.
In which case, right? So I don't know. I think there's legitimate questions that ought to be asked of the NFL in light of that.
Oh, I mean, I can't wait to watch Ben's post-game interview because I feel like that's one of the main questions. Like, how did you feel after coming into the game? And he's probably going to be like, I was fine, I'm fine. But like you said, he looked right away to his number 1 receiver. I feel like he had it made up in his mind in the huddle, like, okay, I know the play, I'm just going to throw it to him, and we're just going to see what happens. But
real quick to Taylor Jones and also to Drew Carter from Purdue University. I thought that this game, when the Steelers got the Forsett fumble, and I love Justin Forsett's story, so I'm glad that fumble didn't. I'm glad he's not asleep. I'm glad he's not going to stay up all night thinking about that fumble. It didn't matter. But when they went to the touchdown to, I guess it wasn't Antonio Brown, but they got the touchdown on the next play. I thought that we were really in a position when the Steelers cut it to 2015 that the game was going to change. I thought they should not have gone for 2 there. There were still 12 minutes left. Entirely possible the Ravens kick a field goal, and that, as always, bore itself out. But nonetheless, the way the Ravens answered that was impressive. That was a serious drive, and that was a drive that makes you think again, although I think that, because we had a Bronco defensive back, sadly, from UCLA, who mistimed his jump and gave Joe Flacco $60 million. Nonetheless, this drive looked like Joe Flacco was he looked like a Super Bowl quarterback there in the 4th quarter, really the whole second half.
You can't be mad if Joe shows up in the playoffs, man.
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah.
You can't. Everybody always has a doubt about him. Every season there's always something about Flacco, but I mean, proof is in the pudding.
All right, we got to go. Both of you guys, give me a percentage likelihood that the Ravens can beat the Patriots next week in Foxborough, and then I'll tell you whether you're right or wrong. Taylor, we'll start with you.
As far as the percentage, I struggle to suggest anything because I have the Steelers winning this game anyway. But I will tell you that I think New England will struggle along the offensive line protecting Tom Brady when it comes to Elvis Dumervil and Terrell Suggs off the edge. They struggled in Week 17 against the Jets front seven, and this is a much better group than that coming out in the next week. So,
give me a number. Make a number up. No one's going to hold you to it.
I'll say the Patriots still have a 65% chance of winning.
All right, so a 35% chance for the Ravens. By the way, look over. Go back to Taylor, and I love that over his right shoulder is Big Ben. That's good.
Hey kids, Big Ben.
Couldn't have planned it any better, right?
Yeah. So Drew, what's your thought on the Ravens?
I give them a good 75% chance.
The Patriots of winning. So the Ravens have some chance.
Yeah,
25.
for sure.
Yeah. I think you're basically both right because I was going to go with 30. I wanted one of you to be dramatically wrong, but I'd say they got a puncher's chance of winning that, better than a puncher's chance of winning that game. Because remember, Joe Flacco's Ravens have already gone into Foxborough in the playoffs and beat Tom Brady as a heavy favorite.
And I'll tell you what, you don't want to count out John Harbaugh in the playoffs. He's got a better winning percentage at 10-4 than Bill Belichick does. Obviously, Belichick has more wins, but also more losses.
Yeah.
And Flacco, we know he earned his money in the playoffs in the Super Bowl run a couple years back.
We're overtime.
Last 5 games, 13 touchdowns, no picks. It's hard to count them out.
Taylor, you bring up a great point. I know we're overtime, but the fact that now the 14 playoff games since John Harbaugh and Joe Flacco came to the Ravens, they've played in more playoff games
Than the Patriots.
than anybody else.
Anybody else.
Very
They went on
impressive.
the road.
Yeah.
It's hard to count them out.
All right, guys, that'll do it for this game. Thanks for watching the NFL Playoffs recap on TYT Sports, brought to you by the Vizio P-Series 4K Ultra HD Smart TVs.